Our opening thought this morning comes from Iris Murdoch from The Sea. She writes, "One can be too ingenious in trying to search out the truth. Sometimes one must simply respect its veiled face. Of course, this is a love story." Our next reading is from Simone de Beauvoir, from her work, The Ethics of Ambiguity. She writes, "As long as there have been persons and they have lived, they have all felt this tragic ambiguity of their condition. But as long as there have been philosophers and they have thought, most of them have tried to mask it." Our next reading is also from Simone de Beauvoir and The Ethics of Ambiguity. She writes, "The notion of ambiguity must not be confused with that of absurdity. To declare that existence is absurd is to deny that it can ever be given a meaning. To say it is ambiguous is to assert that its meaning is never fixed, that it must be constantly one. Absurdity challenges every ethics, but also the finished rationalization of the real world would leave no room for ethics. It is because our condition is ambiguous that we seek, through failure and outrageousness, to save our existence." The title of the discourse this morning is The Ambiguity of Existence. The Ambiguity of Existence. And one of the things I'll be looking at this morning is how it is difficult for us as persons to accept ambiguity. It's difficult for us as persons to accept the ambiguity of existence. It's difficult for us to accept ambiguity when it comes to issues of truth and meaning and values. This is something that we often try to escape from. I was reminded of this week, actually. You may recall that last week I talked on the topic of hope for regeneration, and I mentioned in my talk that I did not think it was wrong or evil or sinful for persons not to believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus. Well, it just so happens that there are a lot of people who don't like the ambiguity of that statement, and when I published the discourse last week, suddenly thousands of people were reading my blog, and I was getting messages from persons telling me where God should take my soul for for eternity for expressing such a view, which I will once again express here, that it is possible to follow the way of Jesus' love and justice in the world without believing in the physical resurrection, and it is neither wrong nor sinful or evil to do so. We humans have difficulty accepting the ambiguity of our existence. We often prefer moral absolutes. We prefer sometimes certain and unchanging truths, prescribed, pre-given values, and a clear, unchanging understanding of the meaning of life. But these preferences that we may have do not remove the reality of ambiguity in our lives, nor do they remove our responsibility to live within the ambiguity without bringing unnecessary harm to others or hindering the freedom of others to respond to the ambiguity of existence in their own ways, even when we might think they're going to hell for doing so. History shows us that we often become dangerous and deadly when we deny the ambiguity of life. We often become dangerous and deadly when we insist that all others adhere to whatever cause, worldview, or ideology we may use to convince ourselves that ambiguity does not exist. The rejection of ambiguity for the certainty of a particular cause can contribute to persons becoming so serious about upholding or supporting their cause that they tend to dehumanize and can even oppress others in the process. History shows us that millions of persons, if not billions of persons throughout human history, have become so serious about a cause that they end up doing things that are actually horrific to other persons. They end up oppressing the freedom and the humanity of other persons. Embracing the ambiguity of our existence also involves recognizing that the future is not a given. It's not been predestined. It's not something that we know is going to happen in a certain way. It's not something that even some divine being knows will happen in a certain way. It is not a given. The future is open, and our freedom and our choices that we make really do matter. They matter in relation to cultivating a more just, beloved, and sustainable community on earth. Now, our decisions about the future, our actions now matter, but they're not everything. There are many other things within the world that are contributing to what the future will be. But our decisions, our actions matter. They contribute to what that future will be. As persons, we are, in a way, radically free. Doesn't mean that we're not conditioned by our surroundings. It doesn't mean that we're not influenced by the communities of which we are a part. We are profoundly influenced by the communities of which we are a part. But we are also radically free to create our own meaning and to create our own values in our lives. But the problem is that we often express our freedom in ways that it's not responsible. We express it in ways that are not responsible. And we do not take into consideration the effects that our actions often have on other persons. We often give ourselves to causes, political movements, religions, and other external groups, and we tend to lose ourselves to these causes in such a way that we allow it to usurp our freedom. We allow it to take away our freedom. And when we lose ourselves to these external causes and forces and allow them to choose our meaning and choose our value for us, we become prone to give up the responsibility that comes with genuine freedom. And we simply do what we are told to do. As I said, this can be extremely dangerous, as history is littered with the atrocities committed by persons who have lost themselves to a cause in such a way that they justify the oppression of others and simply do what they are told to do, even if what they are told to do is evil. You remember the mantra of so many persons in the Nuremberg trials when asked why they did what they did, and their answer was they were simply following orders. These are the persons who become putty in the hands of ruthless, authoritarian political and religious leaders, and who often become willing to do great harm to themselves and to others for the sake of the cause. This is why persons like Simone de Beauvoir, whose work we read from this morning, she reminds us that true freedom comes with responsibility. As she puts it, we will ourselves to be free while also willing others to be free. We will ourselves to be free while also willing others to be free. I love Simone de Beauvoir's take on existentialism more than I like her partner's take, Jean-Paul Sartre. She focuses on the ambiguity of our existence. Sartre tends to focus more on the absurdity of our existence. And I think her take is much more helpful and constructive in terms of helping us see what we need to be doing to be responsible in our freedom in relation to others who we also want to be free. We freely create our own meaning and values while others should have the same opportunity. We freely create our own meaning and values, and then we will others to have that same opportunity. This means that we ought never to oppress others, and that we ought to actively participate in bringing about the liberation of others when they experience oppression. Authentic freedom, as Simone de Beauvoir calls it, Sartre refers to it as genuine freedom more often, is expressed through the liberation of persons who have been cut off from their own freedom by the oppressive actions of others. The problem is, this is a problem we all face, is that freedom, especially the radical freedom that persons like Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre are talking about, can be scary. Freedom can be scary. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "We are condemned to be free." The ambiguity of our experience can be terrifying. The ambiguity of our experience is, well, ambiguous. We often want to hold on to the security blanket of ready-made answers and prescribed values that are simply given to us to embrace and to follow. We cling to our causes. We cling to our political ideologies. We cling to what our religion tells us to believe. We attempt to escape ambiguity because we do not find the experience of ambiguity to always satisfy our yearning for certainty. And we often are terrified by our own radical freedom in an ambiguous world. The attempt to escape ambiguity, though, is the cause of so many problems and so much suffering in our world. Thinking back to my experience of the last week in terms of having persons who were so serious about their cause take the time to interact with me in interesting ways, I'll simply say that attempts to escape ambiguity often play out in the adherence to creeds and doctrines in many religions that can end up stifling our religious imagination and restricting our freedom. We hold on to the order and security that we think we receive from absolute truths and religiously prescribed meanings and values, and this can hinder us from living into a more responsible freedom in the world. I think we see this in the continued and often forced adherence to the Nicene Creed. Some of you have heard me talk about the Nicene Creed before. Not a big fan. The early church theologians were limited in their constructs of describing the nature of Jesus by the substance metaphysics of their time. That'll make sense in a moment, I hope. I'll say it again. The early church theologians were limited in their constructs of describing the nature of Jesus by the substance metaphysics of their time, and that understanding of reality, of ultimate reality, which is what metaphysics means, was influenced greatly by ancient Greek philosophy. This is one of the key reasons why there was so much discussion about substance in the discussions and the depictions of the Trinity in early Christianity. If you read the early church theologians, they're trying to figure out how someone can be both divine and human, how someone could be a participant in one substance but yet still have some distinctiveness as a person. So they were wrestling with this concept of substance and what it meant for their understanding of who Jesus was. But here's what's interesting. Contemporary physics and contemporary metaphysics pose a significant challenge to substance metaphysics, a significant challenge to thinking about the world in terms of it being made up of what we call substances. And we often call those substances or divide those substances into physical substance, right? And mental substance, and oftentimes mental substance is also seen as spiritual substance. So this substance metaphysics tends towards a kind of dualistic understanding of the world. Physical substance on the one side, spiritual substance on the other. But contemporary physics and contemporary metaphysics actually hypothesize that what we have been calling substance is actually an abstraction from reality. It's not something that even exists in reality. It's just an idea that we have about reality. And like so many of our ideas, we have taken that idea of reality and reified it. We've made it real. We've given it the status of being something that actually is, when it's simply one of our ideas about the world. So instead of substance actually existing, perhaps it's simply an abstraction from the reality of experience rather than something that actually exists in the relations of the cosmos. Contemporary physics and metaphysics actually provide us with an opportunity to think about relations among persons and the rest of reality in non-substance ways or non-substantival ways, and ways which are profoundly more relational than would have been possible for the early church theologians who were attempting to grapple with human and divine relations within the constraints of an ancient Greek philosophical system. By perpetuating adherence to doctrines that are couched in the language of substance metaphysics, we end up limiting our theological imagination and our understanding of our experience of relations within the community of all creation. So the point here, connected to the ambiguity of our existence, is in our desire to escape the ambiguity of our existence and the ambiguity of our understanding of relations in the cosmos. In one religious tradition, in the Christian religious tradition, we have clung to a substance metaphysics of ancient Greek philosophy to make sense of it. And because we don't want to address and face the reality of ambiguity, we have forced adherence to that view for thousands of years. even to the point of having religious wars, even to the point of oppressing and killing, murdering on a mass scale persons in other religious traditions. Given that our theological descriptions develop and change rather than having the static stasis, given that our theological descriptions develop and change as we learn more about the world through reason and experience, I would suggest that it would be more responsible and more conducive to the cultivation of beloved community for us to view our theological doctrines, no matter what the religion might be, to view our constructs that we come up with through our theological imagination as hypotheses. Hypotheses that are open to development, that are open to correction, rather than as creeds to which persons and communities must adhere to follow the way of love and justice in our world. A quest for theological certainty, a quest for certainty of any kind, a quest for doctrinal purity is not what a war-torn, unjust, and unsustainable world needs. What we need right now are peacemakers. What we need right now are justice makers. What we need right now are protectors of the community of all creation. By accepting the ambiguity, the ambiguous reality of our experience, we give ourselves an opportunity to live more fully into responsible freedom that respects the freedom of others, rather than trying to force them to believe in a certain way. It respects the freedom of others as we address the many challenges of our world together in diverse and pluralistic community. We're not meant to be monolithic in our views and our thoughts and our actions and our values. We are a diverse and pluralistic, beloved community. I'll end today's discourse with the words of the great German poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue, do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Thank you for making it okay for me not to feel like I had to hit those high notes at the end of that song. Appreciate that. Our parting thought comes from someone else who made us laugh quite a bit in her life, Gilda Radner. I wanted a perfect ending. Now I've learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. Delicious ambiguity.